Welcome everyone to the second session of our Getting Off Gas series, Choosing Your Appliances. My name is Dr Rachel Goldlust and I am the Sustainability Researcher here at Renew. I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria. I express my gratitude to the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and my hope that we may walk forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. This event series is part of our Getting Off Gas toolkit, where we are supporting households to slash energy bills, cut emissions, and minimise health risks associated with burning fossil fuels in our homes. At Renew, we recognise that Australian homes must be at the centre of the renewable energy transition. That's why our toolkit is just dedicated to supporting residential electrification and will provide practical, independent resources for households on replacing gas with efficient electric appliances. Our set of online resources will detail every step of the household electrification journey and include material from Renew's extensive archive, as well as handy fact sheets and case studies that detail the experiences of families who have successfully transitioned away from household gas. You can check out our toolkit, which has gone live at www.gettingoffgastoolkit.com, and we'll put the link in the chat for easy access. This week, we are particularly buoyed by the news in Victoria of the Andrews government announcement of the ban on gas connections for new developments. From the 1st of January 2024, planning permits for new homes and residential subdivisions will only connect to all electric networks. These changes will apply to all new homes requiring a planning permit, including new public and social housing delivered by Housing Victoria. The government has backed what industry is increasingly aware of, that going all electric can be delivered at no extra cost to the buyer, and it will slash around $1,000 per year off household energy bills, or up to $2,200 for households that already have solar installed. Tonight, we're looking at one of the most popular and critical elements of the electrification journey, choosing appliances. As a significant investment for most Australian households, making sure you've got the right appliances for heating, cooling, hot water and cooking is critical. It means thinking about not only how to make the switch while considering the design of your home, your current needs and budget constraints, but also taking into account what might be coming down the line that you can future-proof with the decisions you make today. So where do we start with this big and complex issue? And what should we be mindful of when making the leap away from our old gas appliances to efficient electric ones? What are the main pitfalls? And what can we arm ourselves with when chatting to tradies or people at the appliance store? Is there a one-size-fits-all solution to choosing your next appliance? But do not fear. We are incredibly lucky tonight to be joined by two fantastic panelists. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Matthew Wright. Matthew is the lead author of Zero Carbon Australia 2020 and 2010's Young Environmentalist of the Year. He is also the founder and previously the Executive Director of Beyond Zero Emissions. Currently, Matthew is the Executive Director at Pure Electric Solutions and is well equipped for today's session. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
We are also very lucky to be joined by Katy Daily. Katy has long been interested in energy efficiency and sustainable building, having worked in the environmental not-for-profit sector for over 20 years, including at Renew and the Energy Efficiency Council. Currently, Katy is the Climate Emergency Officer with the City of Darebin, shaping Darebin's climate emergency strategy and helping residents with their electrification and energy efficiency goals. She is also an admin and frequent contributor to the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group. After purchasing her current home in February 21, she has steadily put into practice the advice that she has provided others for many years, improving her home's energy efficiency, including going off gas in September 2021. Welcome, Katy.
Thanks, Rachel.
We want to acknowledge our Getting Off Gas Toolkit sponsors, notably Pure Electric for their gold sponsorship, Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action for their silver sponsorship, and Be Energy Efficient for their bronze sponsorship. The Getting Off Gas Toolkit has also been made possible with the support of the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Boundless Earth. So before we kick off with our panel discussion, and there's going to be plenty of time for questions for our panelists following, we want to share a video with you that we filmed about the ins and outs of all electric appliances, featuring yours truly, Katy Daily.
We bought our home in 2021, in February of 2021, and from the beginning wanted to make it an all-electric home.
So when we moved in, we had our gas heater, which was behind here, but the electric split system was already in place.
Which made it helpful because we didn't even service the gas heater because at an old place we had to get that service to make sure it was still safe to use, and we knew that we had the split system already in this space, so we just knew that we wouldn't even bother servicing the gas.
We had rented for 10 years, and during that time I was able to do a lot of research, and so I kind of had a pent-up list of things that I wanted to get, and luckily when we were looking at this house, we were looking at this house with the idea of going solar and going all electric, and so part of our decision-making process was, is this going to be the right house, and are we going to be able to go forward with our plans to go all electric?
Saying we have gone all electric at our other house, that we knew if we went all electric at this house as well, we could stop paying the gas connection fee, which adds up over time, especially at our old house. Towards the end, it was only hot water that was on gas, so it was essentially costing us like $2 a day just to have a hot shower. So here we're like, well, we could not get any of the gas appliances service and then just remove it straight away. The
best thing about induction cooking is that you don't ever have to clean a gas stovetop again. But besides that, it's actually such a much better cooking experience. The lows are lower, the highs are higher. It has really great control in between. Has a lot of features that are great, like turning off as soon as you pick up the pan. Ours bridges between multiple elements so that you can have different size pans, and it cooks very evenly. It has a lot of great functions, anti-spill functions, so that when it spills, it turns off. And it's pretty cool to the touch right away, so it's not a risk for little kids. So yeah, we love it.
So when we were looking to get off gas with the gas cooktop, we didn't have to commit to buying a dedicated inbuilt induction cooktop. We just bought 2 portable inductions for now. We just plug into any power point, so we haven't had to upgrade the line yet. So that's definitely a factor in just how easy it can be if you want to just get off one appliance. I've had places where we've left the gas on accidentally, and you just come back and the whole house smells of gas, which just wouldn't happen with electric. If it has too much water because you boiled a pot or something and it's overflowed, then it just trips and it just turns off.
My recommendation for people is, if they are really daunted by the process, is to just make a plan. It's really important to do that research and to keep that research up because the technology is changing. The refrigerants are getting better, the performance is getting better, new things are on the market. So it's good to follow the groups, read, renew, look at My Efficient Electric Home, see what's happening, talk to your friends, see what they're doing. And don't be afraid to reach out, ask people what they've done, and bite the bullet.
So I hope you all enjoyed our little intro video. It's really great to see the wide-ranging benefits and the experiences of people who have chosen to go all electric and get new appliances. So we're going to get started, and thank you to everyone who submitted your questions when you registered for the session. We will endeavour to get to as many of them as we can. Appliances are going to be a hot, quote-unquote, topic. And I'll be putting those questions to our panel. So you can put your questions into the Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and get to them in order. And please be mindful also that some questions that might be too specific to your situation might not be appropriate for the panel setting. I'm also aware that we do have 2 more sessions coming in this series, and so we're going to focus specifically on appliances. But if you want to ask questions about solar EV these or about wiring and plumbing and troubleshooting, you should probably tune into the sessions that are coming up over the next 2 Wednesdays. So I'll start with either of you, Katie or Matthew. Maybe talk first about some of the issues around gas appliances and why we should be thinking about getting rid of them.
I'll go from a consumer perspective. There's, first of all, the one of the reasons that we got rid of our gas appliances was because of the health benefits that the air quality improvements that you can get without burning gas inside of your home. So it was a major driver. Also, you can never get renewable gas, but you can get renewable electricity. So the more appliances that we get that we run off electricity, we can generate our own electricity with solar, and so that was a big driver. Also, energy efficient appliances, electric appliances are much more energy efficient than gas appliances. So efficiency is a big driver for me. So all of those things added together, not having to pay the connection charge for, another service to your house, all of it added up. And in the end, we don't have any energy bills. So it really is adding up right now. And it's been a great decision.
So you don't pay any energy bills at all?
Not right now, although this latest electricity rises, I do think I'm going to have a little bit of one next month before the solar starts kicking in and generating a lot more, but not to the point that it's really that noticeable.
Amazing. And Matthew, sorry?
I think obviously there's an environmental aspect too. We're in a climate emergency, and we need to not be burning petrochemicals, burning the outputs of fossil fuel industry. We need to not be burning gas, which is basically peas in the pod with the oil industry. If you think Exxon Mobil, Shell, BP, Viva, they're all oil companies, and gas and oil are together. So we've got to get off those fossil fuels that are producing climate damaging combustion gases, and even when gas is even worse when it's actually not combusted. So when you do accidentally leave it turned on, you're doing a lot more damage to the environment than when you even burn it. So and the networks that are distributing gas to the residential properties, they are leaking everywhere. So they reckon around about 8% of that leaks to the atmosphere, and that 8% does about as much damage as the CO2 from burning the gas. So it's just not really a good option. It needs to be scaled right back. I think it's great that it's looking like that's happening now, and that the government is possibly going to get behind it as long as they hold their ground and don't get lobbied to backtrack, which is always a worry. So, but I think Katie's just covered it. Why you'd want to get off gas. The health reasons are huge, and the performance of non-gas appliances is just so much better.
I mean, that was going to be my next question. Like, I think about, the old gas heater in the lounge room, and, is the quality of those appliances different, or are we just like looking at the newer options as being better? Katie
mentioned the induction cooktop, the fact that you can have instantly available heat, like 90% of it into the bottom of the pan where you want it, straight into, and then conducting straight to the food. When you take it off, you don't put your hand down and leave the skin behind, or you don't burn your finger off. So this is a benefit. Could you imagine if gas wasn't a thing today, and you tried to introduce this new novel thing called gas, and you wanted to have these open burners in households? I mean, it just wouldn't cut it for safety. It's just, gas doesn't cut it for safety when you compare it to the safety we have around electrical power and access to buildings and the angle of stairwells and all that sort of stuff. Gas is totally dangerous and at odds with all that. So we get to move beyond that to something safer to cook with. And with the other appliances, with heat pumps, you're actually harvesting energy, and this is for space heating and water heating. You're harvesting energy that's low grade around your house, that's just wasted, just sitting there waiting to be harvested. And before you didn't even know it was there. And now you can get 80% of your energy from the atmosphere to do your low temperature heating, being your hot water in your spaces. So it's pretty amazing.
We can talk about efficiency now, or we could get back to it later, but how much more efficient are those heat pumps than their gas equivalent?
So usually a heat pump will achieve there's a range of quality, but let's say in the sort of mid to best range, you should be able to expect if the gas was perfectly combusted. I should do an electrical comparison first. So if you thought of an electric heater, then you should expect about a 70 to 80% saving versus an electric equivalent, that being like an oil-filled heater or a bar radiator or any sort of electric heater, an electric hot water service. So it's like a cylindrical tank with an element in it, like a giant kettle. Now, gas appliance is a bit worse than that. So it heats the same tank, cylindrical tank, but the combustion gases need to go up the flue. And so we have a thing called flue efficiency. And so what we see in those appliances which have a star rating, the ones that are sold on the market commonly, they range from 40% of the gases going up the flue to at the best end about 10% of the gases going up the flue. But no one buys those best end units. The most commonly purchased are the 40% to 20% of the energy is going up with the flue gases. So if you put your hand, don't do it too often or don't be too close, but over the top of where the exhaust is, you'll feel the heat. So that heat's coming from somewhere. That's coming from the energy you've just been buying to heat your water, but it didn't make it into the water. It made it outside, so it wasn't useful to you at all. Whereas with a heat pump, it's the opposite. You're actually extracting and concentrating heat from the outside atmosphere.
Yeah.
So you're basically officially concentrating that and upgrading it to be a higher temperature. So there's a cost to do that, and that's the 20% of energy that runs the motor for the heat pump. And that actually suddenly turns the 10-degree air outside, or the 5-degree air outside, or the 20-degree air outside into 60-degree water in your tank, which is pretty amazing. And that's the magic of refrigeration in reverse. So we discovered the magic of refrigeration because we all have freezers and fridges, and they became a whole cold food chain around the world. Well, the flip side of that is when you peel the back of the fridge, it's hot. It's actually a really efficient way to get heat just by reversing that process.
So before we continue getting on too much on the technical specs of it, I mean, people are, fearful of the costs. So could we get like a little bit of a comparison rundown on the cost difference between each of those appliances so people get an understanding of what we're talking about? So Katy, do you want to start, talking about, I guess, what your options were and how you made those decisions?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll stay up front that I never had gas in my on my radar, so I didn't the cost of what a gas appliance would be. It did. My house came. Maybe I'll give a little bit of a rundown of what my house had and what the journey I took and the dollars for each of the upgrades that we did. Yeah. So when we moved into our house, we had an older front part, which is where our bedrooms are, and then a big, large room to the back. There was redundant heating. So there was a reverse cycle ducted heating and cooling that I don't think the previous tenants ever intended to be used for heating. They had parallel to that a gas ducted heating that went to the old part of the house. I think that was the legacy system that had been there. And then they had a gas fireplace in the lounge room, in the big room in the back. And so I think those were their two heating that they primarily used, and they never used the reverse cycle system for heating. They only used it for cooling. And then we had a gas stovetop with an electric oven, and then we had an instantaneous gas hot water system. So the first thing we did is tested to see whether the reverse cycle ducted system was suitable for heating over the winter. So the first winter we didn't use the gas at all, didn't turn it for heating at all, and just tried it out to see if it worked, and it did. There were some tweaks we made to kind of the balance of where, because it was a cooling specific install, we made a few tweaks to some dampers so that it put more heating into the front part of the house and the rear part of the house. While we were up there, we saw the poor state of our insulation, and so we were going to address that as well later. And then, so the first thing that we did was tested that, so that was great. So we didn't have to do anything with respect to our heating. We then sought quotes for solar and heat pump hot water system. We were able to find a supplier who did both at the same time. So we got the opportunity to have the electricians just come in for that one, doing them both at the same time. And so our last appliance was our gas stove. And in the end, we did what Steph had in the video said she was going to do. We were going to use portable induction, and then we decided to actually MacGyver a little bit of a DIY solution to take off the gas bits off of our stove and to retrofit with a piece of wood that we then inset a stovetop into. And because that was our last appliance, and then I called the gas company thinking it would take, weeks and weeks and weeks for them to come turn off the gas. And the next day they came out and turned off the gas. So we didn't have our solution for a stovetop ready. We had that portable induction cooktop. Luckily then I didn't have to get a plumber do anything with the gas line. So it actually saved us money in that respect because I didn't have to have the plumber deal with the gas when we were getting rid of our last appliance. And so it was a little fortuitous, and I hadn't even thought about it. So that was great. We ended up spending about $3,000 for that stovetop solution that we did. We spent $15,000 on our heat pump and our 8.8 kilowatt solar system. We went a little bit more expensive on both of those. We got a stand-in heat pump, and so one of the more expensive models that are out there, and solar edge inverter. And so we did spend a little bit more on components. And then we did end up adding a split system to that back room so that we can isolate that room. I worked from there. We could isolate the front and the back then and heat less of the house. Ducted reverse cycle systems aren't the most efficient as far as reverse cycle heating is concerned. So we tried to get the most efficient system that we could. And we went with a 6 kilowatt system back there, and that cost about $4,800.
And did you do the sort of payback costings then, or have you just worked it out?
Oh, that's on my list to do. I have a to-do list on the payback. Yeah. If you assume that I would have, about a 1,800 to 2,400, and kind of the old prices, probably more like $3,000 heating and gas bill and electricity bill. It adds up pretty quickly, and we aren't paying any bills. We haven't paid any bills since September 2021. So yeah, I'll do that payback period at some point in time. I just haven't gotten to that.
I think just think on the cost front, I think new houses, or if you had a house that didn't have gas on it, the sort of price that to get gas on would be $2,500 to $5,000. So that's plumbing, copper, like gas pipes are pretty expensive. They sort of moved to cheaper plastic options, but they're still that's up there. In fact, I got a gas instant put on when I changed from gas storage in 2002, I think it was, to a solar system boosted with a gas instant unit. And so that needed a much larger pipe to come in, because gas instant units use a lot of gas in an instant, as opposed to a storage cylinder, which heats up over hours. And I had to pay $2,500 premium back then. That could be $5,000 in today's money to get this giant pipe put in order to have a $4,000 time evacuated tube solar system. So just keep that in mind, that gas is pretty expensive to put on. And now you're just dealing with less regulation, less risk, less trades to be able to get many of your appliances in. So
I guess the question then is, Matthew, what do you recommend to people when they come to you asking for what should they do first? I mean, there's a lot of ways into this question. What do you often advise?
Well, years and years ago, and this was common wisdom that I subscribed to, that a lot of people had, was that you'd say, okay, deal with your built envelope first. People would say, do your insulation and do your air sealing. But I've subsequently come up with a new view that if you're inspired to do one particular thing, or you got the idea you're going to do your hot water service, or your hot water service was failing, or you're going to put solar on your roof, is don't try and throw a curveball at someone who's ready to do one of the things you need to do, just because it might be slightly down the priority list versus the benefit of doing another one first. So if they want to do their space heating, I mean, you might have to oversize the space heating slightly to make up for the fact they haven't fully done their insulation, or they might be willing to size it leanly. So you've spoken to the client about this, or a household has thought, okay, I'm willing to be on the edge of it's just warm enough in the worst of winter, because I know that in the next 6 months I'm going to install insulation in the roof. And that's also now the motivator to do the next step. Whereas if they're ready to go ahead and do their space heating, but then it's like, oh, no, don't do that. Try and find a contractor to do your insulation. That might be hard work, and that just puts a puts a downer on the whole thing. So I think the most important thing to do, if you're inspired to do something, is to do what you're inspired to do right away, and then to work through a planned list if you haven't worked out what else you're going to do. You might have two things that you've already decided to do, so do those. And if you've got no particular preference and you're a very organised person and you want to take a plan to it, I mean, there's three main vectors. You've also got cooking, you've got hot water, and you've got space heating. Space heating is probably the most challenging. I mean, hot water for most people can be organised in a day. It's just sort of this monolithic, unit, and it just gets replaced with another unit. So it's actually not a too complicated task. Cooktop's a little bit more complicated just because the cutouts and things like that, but a lot of people have a 600 mil by 600 mil bench, so they can buy the most common sizes and drop them in there. Well, these days you can also buy the uprights that replace those all-in-one ovens and stovetops as a complete induction item. So then you just got a slightly more expensive electrical circuit to go in, and we're talking, say, $400 to $600 indicatively, and then whatever the cooktop cost you. Now, the cheapest end of the cooktops, you're probably coming in at say, an IKEA with a 5-year warranty, and that's $500 to $1,000 depending on the size of the unit. And then you're getting into what I sort of would pitch people should go for if they can afford it, sort of the entry-level European, so like a Bosch at $1,500 or $1,600, or I've got MEEH appliances because I'm a bit into this stuff, and I don't know what a MEEH, but obviously MEEH is going to cost $2,000, $2,500 or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because often, people are at the mercy of whoever the tradesperson is that they end up talking to at the time. So what kind of research can people start to do before that moment when they're kind of stuck, or they, need help and end up relying on whatever information they get given? So what should people be thinking about when they're looking at changing appliances?
Yeah, I'll answer that, because I do think that I advise people all the time, and I talk to people all the time, and they, for years and years and years and years, the common refrain is, my plumber told me heat pumps don't work. They don't work in Victoria. They don't work wherever they happen to be. They never work. I've done so many where I put them in and I had to rip them out. And that was a mantra you hear. And that's experience from, I think, the first generation of heat pumps that were put in, in the 2000s. And the technology has evolved quite a bit. And it's much, much more reliable and efficient. Better refrigerants. There's a large range of options now, and we have many more options here than I know they do in the U.S. So, we're actually pretty lucky with some of the technology that we have here. There's quite a few more options that we have, and we're further along the journey. But sometimes the tradespeople are not. So you really kind of have to both not only do some of the research to figure out what it is that you might want, what would be the best for your application, as well as researching the trades person that comes in to do the job, because you don't want to have to fight them the whole time. And I've had a couple of uncomfortable conversations with some tradespeople based on some decisions that they were making. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so that's why the idea of making a plan, going appliance by appliance and doing the research in advance is really the thing that I recommend the most. When we were getting the reverse cycle system in the back half of the house, what I did is I used a website called fairair.org.au, which is a sizing calculator that asks a lot of questions about what type of insulation you have in your roof, how big the room is, what the volume of the room is, what the area of the window space is, whether they're double glazed or not double glazed, all those types of great questions that then allow you to and then you put in whether it's going to be a primarily heating use of it or a primarily cooling use of it, because there are different sizes based on what your primary use is going to be. And then they put a recommendation out, and I use that to decide the sizing of the system that I was looking for. And then I put a spreadsheet together of different types that are recommended that I knew were in the range of the size that I was looking for, that were the brands that I knew were good brands. And I compared the cooling capacity, the efficiency of cooling, the star rating of the cooling, and then the heating capacity, the heating efficiency, the coefficient of performance, and the star rating for that, and then looked at the refrigerant. And through that analysis, I was able to choose 2 or 3 that I thought would work for us. We have a primarily heating needs for it, so I was erring on the performance of the heating rather than the cooling, and that, it came out with the one that I think was the best one for us, and the size was right. Yeah, and I used, to Matthew's point, I decided that we could live. That room actually has redundant heating, so it's not. I wasn't too worried about it, but we were going to make some thermal improvements to that room. So I put in what was going to be the situation, what we were going to end up with that room from a sizing perspective. So I didn't do the oversize it, and then I was looking at the end result of where it was going to be when I did the calculator, and we didn't have to have a winter, so it was okay. It all worked out.
I'll also add there that generally you can probably concentrate on sizing for winter, because almost everywhere across Australia, the heating requirement is higher, a lot higher than the cooling requirement. So you kind of get cooling as just a bonus. So even though they're marketed as cooling air conditioners, they're actually, once you start doing your all-electric home, you're going to be using them primarily as a heater. So in Victoria, for example, it's probably something like 30-1, the ratio of heating requirement to air conditioning. Even in Queensland, it's going to be 6-1. So the heating requirement is higher. So keep that in mind. Unless you're in somewhere, like Darwin or something. If you're in most places where most of the population is in Australia, they're going to be heating climates ahead of being cooling climates. So especially in the southern latitudes, you want to really get your concentrate on your winter sizing.
And in thinking about, I just want to go back to that COP, to the coefficient. What does it stand for?
Coefficient of performance. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you find that information out? And then how do you weigh up that with quality? Does the quality, I know we mentioned a few brands earlier that are sort of known for that, but are they necessarily the best ones to get? How do you weigh up those price, quality, and performance?
Yeah. So in my case, yes, the higher, the better quality units had the higher coefficient of performance. So, and they were more expensive. It was a little more expensive. It wasn't gravely more expensive, but it was a little more expensive. To get the information, I would go online and just drill into the spec sheet, and they were there. I think there are other places that amalgamate that information, but I was worried about it being up to date. So I did end up going to the spec sheets of going to the websites, going to the spec sheets, and pulling that information out into a table.
For space heating, we do Daikin, but any of the Japanese brands, Daikin, Mitsubishi Electric, Mitsubishi Heavy, they're 2 separate companies to confuse everybody.
Yeah.
Fujitsu, that they tend to be the best stuff out there. But the difference in price in that particular area is only like $100 or $200 for, say, a split system. So it's not huge. You're paying $100 extra to get the best of the best kind of unit. So it's really worth considering going quality with your split heater air conditioner. With something like the sand and hot water heat pump, there is quite a price difference versus the cheapest units on the market. We supply the sand, and so the sand advantage is, it's designed to go down to minus 18 degrees. So on its label, it illustrates says minus 10, but it's same products sold in Europe and North America down to minus 18. And the thing about some of the cheaper units is they get to 4 degrees actually at the heat pump, and they need to have their backup element kick in. But what that actually means is can even happen at 7 degrees ambient, because 7 degrees ambient, the actual temperature because the unit back feeds some air to itself, creates a microclimate. At 7 degrees, it can start acting with a COP of 1 once the element's turned on. It's the same as, and I do have concerns about this looking forward in the transition to renewables, because the peak design period on the grid is going to be the middle of winter. So while these cheaper units are mining subsidies, so they're very good at generating ESCs, STCs, and solar VIC rebates and VICs, they're actually causing the winter peak to grow and grow and grow. And in the future renewable grid, and we modelled this at Beyond Zero Emissions back in 2007, we were working on it and published in 2010, is that the whole design of a renewable grid is around winter in Australia.
Yeah.
So everything else is a walk in the park. It's like between May and late August or something like that. That's your design period for the grid, and you've got ample energy outside that because you need to overbuild to achieve that.
We might move on to the big question that a lot of people have. I'm not sure, Katy, if this is something that's come up on your radar, but there's always a question around what to do with your gas ducted system and whether or not it's worth retrofitting or whether it's more efficient to just move towards putting in reverse cycle heat.
In my situation, I had parallel systems. So I actually did go through the process of removing it when I got my insulation topped up in my ceiling. When I say topped up, in the new part of it, I was a top up. In the old part of it, it was really putting in insulation. So there was virtually none. There was not very much at all. And part of the reason I did end up removing the system out of the roof was to free up space to be able to insulate under it. So I didn't want a blank space where that was. And the ducting for it was, it was just an octopus up there because there were two ducted systems up there that were interweaved with amongst each other. So it was just a cleaner situation to get it out of there. For, in the future, I do something different with ducting, it'll be a lot cleaner. But generally, and Matthew can probably speak to this better than I, it is the size of the air is hotter with gas, and so it requires different ducting or different return sizes. And the ducting that you have from your gas, depending on when it was installed, but likely if it was installed any time previous, even if it was just installed last year, it likely was installed to the bare minimum of insulation for the ducting itself, and you can do much better. And I will say the difference between a split system and ducted systems is pretty significant in the efficiencies that you can get with a split system versus ducted. So although ducted is electric and it is using a heat pump, there are lots of losses, even with very well insulated ducts. There's lots of losses in those systems. You have to heat a larger area. You can't isolate the heat as well. You have to keep doors open, especially if you've got good draft-proof house. You need to keep doors open to get the airflow moving for it to work, and any ducted system for it to work. And all of those things add up to losses in the system, and so less efficient systems with a ducted system. But that being said, we've kept our ducted system because it was there. We don't use it that often, and it take the edge off and when we come into the bedrooms at night. But we do as much as we can heating with a reverse cycle system in that back room, and we'll. When the ducted system dies, so it's probably about 12 years old. So at some point it is going to die. And I am in the make a plan phase right now of what we're going to do when that situation happens. And we probably will go to multi-split systems or, a smaller ducted system because it's only going to be heating that back half of the house, and maybe a combo of ducting. And I don't know. I haven't got very far in my make a plan on that yet, but yeah.
Matthew, did you have anything to add on? Do you get asked that question a lot about?
Yeah, so we've just, as a business, we've concentrated on, we want to create be a leader in the space. So we want to really showcase what's the most efficient option. So we've stuck simply to distributed splits as our solution, which is what gives the greatest efficiency. If you're using efficient small distributed splits versus a monolithic ducted unit, you're probably looking at half the energy consumption for that house. So it's pretty significant. So if customers want it, I don't say not a thing. I just refer them to like a Daikin or Mitsubishi dealer or something and say, go with someone who's already set up to do that. I haven't invested any effort in setting our business up to do that because we just want to showcase the houses with the lowest energy, and lowest bills and the least environmental impact. So, but obviously they can work, and there are all those issues that Katy talked about with ducts. With Sustainability Victoria, on a number of occasions over the past 20 years, has tested ducts. They've come up with they might test, like in one run, they might test 15 or 20 houses or something, and they came up between 20% losses to 50% losses. Always, nothing below 20%. That's just in the ducts themselves. Sometimes some of that heat would actually be under the house and maybe make it back into the house. Mostly it would be gone. And then there's the problem of that pressure equalization mismatch that Katy also talked about, which is where you've got doors closed or inadequate grills and things like that, so that some rooms become positively pressurized, others become negatively pressurized. And because of that, it encourages the air infiltration from other leaks you have in the house into the building envelope. So you get more draft cold air happening in the house because of that. Whereas if you've got small splits just producing the heat locally, there's none of that positive, negative pressure stuff happening.
That's interesting. I hadn't even gotten in thought about the physics of those kind of things. I guess you don't know it until you've got it there and then you've done all your draft proofing. But my question about having more systems in terms of cost and payback is, these are appliances, these have life cycles. So how do you weigh up the 10 to 12 years of, 3, 4, 5 split systems versus like a single hydronic system, for example?
There's a lot of resources in us. There's a lot of resource material input into a hydronic system. So when you get the big monolithic unit, it's actually quite a bit bigger with a lot more heat exchange. There might be a compromise there where there's actually more heat exchange, which is more material in having distributed splits. But I think that split systems actually got a pretty good history. Unfortunately, they're not so efficient, but there's Hitachis and Panasonics out there still hanging off the side of some buildings, and they might have been installed in 1970 and they still work. I mean, they've got a COP of 2 or 2.5 or something, so not great, whereas today we can get 5, but they still work. And I've got a 2006 Panasonic legacy unit that works fine, that heats my office here, that I work day in, day out. It's probably COP of 4. If I was installing today, I would have a COP of 5. So yeah, it's costing the environment a little margin there. But if it was running a ducted system here, I'd be lucky to get a system efficiency of 3, maybe pushing it to 3.5 if the ducts were really good and I didn't have this pressure equalization stuff happening.
And remember, if you do have a single system, it's running every time you want to heat something, it's running. Even if you've got zoning, it's running. So it's cycling, it's doing everything that might eventually wear it out. Whereas the smaller systems that are heating specific rooms, the likelihood that you're going to be using them as much is much lower. Because that's part of the advantage of having them, is that you don't have to heat the whole house. You can heat, you can treat the rooms that you're in, and that really improves the efficiency and the cost to run your home. And so you may not use them that much. So again, the longevity is there. As Matthew was saying, there's a lot of systems.
Yeah, I mean,
clean your filter though. Make sure you clean your filter.
If you read the manufacturers, they might be telling you to inspect and do it every 2 weeks. That's probably a bit onerous, but make sure you're doing it a couple of times per season. If you can get the dust off, you'll instantly see the benefit. So it's really, really good to run a light, soft brush over the filters outside, over the bin, holding your breath, kind of thing. Definitely worth it. Thumbs up to clean the filters.
We did have that suggestion last week, and it also came with the other. What about placement of heating units? Because I've heard different versions of putting them up high versus putting them down low, and where and how. Like if you've got a high ceiling Victorian house, what's the advantage of putting something up high if it's only going to stay up in the top part of the ceiling? Really,
and that, yes, good question. Why aren't there more units that are floor units for reverse cycle systems, and why is the COP of them not as good as the ones that are up high? So that, and maybe Matthew can answer that question, but that is, that is an evolution that I think the market needs, is more choices as far as where they're located, where the bulkhead's located. You're right. If it's a predominantly heating environment, then why is it on the top of the ceiling? It doesn't make sense to me. I did actually just install a fan because a ceiling fan, because I wasn't penetrating. I'm not penetrating all the corners of the room. The room's a pretty big room. It's the kitchen. It's an open plan room. And so I just installed a fan to be able to get that, better pushing that heat. But, it itself has degrees of directional, flow of where things can go. But when you're trying to heat a large space, we did need a ceiling fan there. So, and the hope is that ceiling fan can be used so I don't have to turn the air conditioning on as well. So there's reasons for that. But I agree. I think there's different. I hope that these evolve. I know a lot of people don't like the looks of them. I didn't when I first moved to Australia. I didn't like the look of them either, but I've grown to ignore them. I don't see them anymore. But I think it's calling out for some beautiful industrial design to be applied to them. Come back with the 40s pretty chrome things or something. I would like to see. We actually do have quite a variety of things on the market, but what we are lacking some choices that I think would improve the use for what we use them for.
Yeah, I think, okay, firstly, the reason that up high units, the wall mounted units are better is that the market in the small and medium size of those, the global market is huge. They're a mass produced product like Toyotas. They're making, or Teslas these days. They're making millions of the things. So they're very efficient at making them, all their materials, their production. It's very efficient. So that's why they can produce the best units and they can stamp them out, and the price is actually relatively low. A few of the manufacturers have bought some nice looking wall mounted units to Australia, including Dakin did, and I was marketing one, but they're from Europe, but then COVID came and it was all too much and they importing it. It was a very nice looking unit. Panasonic has I don't know if people are buying it, but I saw a nice looking unit from them, but that's it. I haven't seen any other nice looking floor mounted consoles. They seem to look like really horrible industrial things. So, but that said, all heaters, like all rooms, all spaces, when they're heated, the heat will stratify. So you use a heater on the ground and jump on the ladder is probably the best idea rather than chair, and get your head up high, and it'll be hot up there. It doesn't matter if the heat registers are on the ground or if they're up high. A problem with split systems is that the sensor is actually up high. So you might read, spaces should be 20 degrees. Well, if you want to get worried about that, don't use the remote to indicate that to you, because even the down low heater, it's going to have temperatures up top at 26 degrees or something, but down here at the floor level, it's going to be 20 degrees. So if you're going to, be the gatekeeper and, lock in the other people in your household are shivering away and you're going to lock in 20, you're actually not really locking in 20 for them. You could be locking in 17 or 18 because there's going to be a few degrees in stratification depending on how high your ceilings are. So in our house, we've got high ceilings, 3.7 metre ceilings. The building envelope's pretty well insulated, but not how I'd like it to be, but certainly better than the one-star houses that might be around Brunswick and Coburg and in the north of Melbourne. But we probably set our heaters at 24 if we want to really warm the house up. So, and that's because the sensor's right up high, I'll be on my reach.
Sometimes the opposite happens though, and this is an important piece around installation. Sometimes your installer will leave a really big gap where the conduit is coming into the unit itself, and if that gap's not sealed, then cold air is coming in and it doesn't reach the temperature that you want it to reach, even though the room is reaching the temperature. The sensor is not getting to that temperature, and so you can overheat trying to reach temp. So you do have to kind of keep on it, fine tune it, and make sure that
if you can't achieve a stable temperature, then it just heads towards 30 the max or something. Then you could potentially investigate whether you've got that problem. I think that's quite reasonable. But if you play around a bit, maybe invest in some sort of a temperature sensor or not a sensor. I mean, something like a thermometer, just a regular
thermometer.
Yeah. Thermometer, just see what's happening at the table level, and if you're getting 20 there and it holds once you've spent time to heat the space up, then it's probably working well.
So we might shift off space heating and move on to cooking, because I know that's it's going to be a hot topic and lots of people are going to want to possibly ask questions about it. So some of the prefigured questions were, I guess, what's a major drawback? Because I think it is we all know it's the sentimental item, and it's the thing that people are the last frontier of going all electric is often the stove. So, I mean, you did sell it quite well, Katy, in your opener. But what are the drawbacks, or what are the potential things that people?
Yeah, well, I am a broken record, because the induction cooktops, the highs are higher, the lows are lower. You have, really great control in between, and the cleaning alone is worth the price of admission, in my opinion. That being said, there's obviously cultural, ties to fire and types of cooking that I think people who do switch to induction or try it get over that hump, but a lot of people don't even go there. They don't even, make the attempt to try it. People have a real strong connection to their existing pans, which may not work on an induction. And so I think that's the cost of getting new pans, or the sentimental attachment to your pans.
Yeah.
Cooking with a pan may be something that people, really don't want to part with. It does require wiring, a dedicated circuit, and in some apartments and other situations, it may be difficult to run that wiring. And so you may reach roadblocks to getting, a built-in induction stovetop rather than using portables because of that. And I will say with the portables, I work for a council, and we're going to hopefully get portables into the library. I know that there's a couple other councils that already have it to loan, to let people try it out, try their pans, see if it works. But, I've made that comparison that a portable induction versus a built-in induction is like a portable camp stove versus a built-in stovetop. And it's not quite that bad, but they're definitely better quality. You go there seem to be some issues that some have with cycling and not quite, heating quite evenly, as well as some of the better, inbuilt ones. Maybe a noise too, because it's got a fan built into it. So it's got, some electronic noises as well. So all of these things are things I've heard people complain about. We got a, kind of a higher end portable induction stovetop that was New View, I think is what it's called, and it was about $200, and it doesn't have those problems. So maybe if you spend an extra $100 on your portable, you might not run into some of these problems. It also has a bigger cooking area than the IKEA and some of the lower cost ones. But that being said, you can get into an induction portable for $69 from IKEA, so the price point is very good. But the downsides are, it is glass, and people have dropped pans, especially cast iron, heavy pans. There is a risk of that. My 14-year-olds haven't done that yet, but knock on wood, you never know if that's going to have people drop. I think there's the recommendation not to put things in the cupboards above it that can drop down and break the glass. I guess there's, the caveat that they say you shouldn't have a pacemaker when you're using it. Although I think there are some ways that you can stand where I haven't heard that that's actually been an issue, but it's been an issue that they warn against.
The high quality units may have slightly stronger glass. That said, I had a friend with a MEEH, and his mother came and visited, and they stored chopping boards above it. Don't do chopping boards above it. The chopping board came down as a heavy chopping board and put a crack straight through the glass. So yes, be careful about anything heavy stored above it. I'll reiterate that point because I have an experience of knowing a very sad person who damaged their $2,000 cooktop. The other thing to look out for, if you can test a unit before you install it, so install or what have you, if you're not doing Bosch or MEEH or something, if you put a pan full of water on top of the thing, you can see where the bubbles are straight away. Now, if it's a very small circle like that, but your pot's like that, and they've even drawn the line for the pot like that, but it's only like that, that's a really bad unit. Don't buy that one. because that's where the heat's coming through. So I'd point that out for people looking at getting a cheaper unit, to make sure that they've had some ability to test it, because even though it's got a ring drawn, a sort of scammy thing a cheaper non-known brand might do is that they'll only heat this small area. And that wouldn't be a great experience. But in terms of gas, I mean, my experience, we could never keep our gas jets clean. Like, we just didn't have it in us. We cleaned around them and little curvy bits and stuff, but you get up close to the jet, always dirty. Induction cooktop, it's wipe it with a cloth. Used to be microfiber, but I'm getting scared of those now. Wipe it with a cloth after you use it, maybe a tiny bit of elbow grease. Gone. It's just water. You don't need detergent, you don't need anything. And then after about 5 years, a little bit of sort of stuff sort of built up between the base of where the pans are, and you can then get from any vendor like a Harvey Norman or something, you can get like a $10 razor thing, and you just very carefully scrape it, make sure you don't go in angled, and it comes off, and it's perfectly clean and ready to go again. I've had one since again 2006, a MEEH, and it's still going strong, touch wood, and probably cleaned it about 3 times with the scraper. One time a bit more intensely, but that's a pretty good run. And
is that a normal run? I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about, do they have a lifespan like every other electric appliance?
Well, because yeah, I mean, it was I bought it when it was an earlier industrial sort of thing available. I think today I'd expect them to have a long run. I'd hope that kind of appliance would last 20, 30 years, which is similar to what the previous generation of those kind of appliances have lasted. So this one now it's going on 17 years. If it's 20, I'd be happy with that life. I'm hoping, and I'd hope for more.
One thing to look out for, though, that does shorten the life of them that people run into is not having enough ventilation. There are requirements. There are specs for each of them, so you really need to make sure that ventilation is there. Don't skimp on that. So I've heard
you could also avoid the show-off boost option too if you don't need it. If you run it right at its limits, you're more likely to potentially strain the energy, because again, that's heat related. So something like a 1, 2, 3 provide 10 boost. If you're going to boost, not for too long, or do your show off about how quick it can heat water faster than any other cooktop. But do that once or twice, but don't always do it. So yeah, if you're not running it on absolute full as often, that will probably, my guess is, extend the life. Yeah. And most cooking is simmer something on number 4 out of 10 or something, which is not very high, and heating quickly at 7 or 8 or something out of 10. Mine sort of has 10 and then boosts, which is like crazy heat.
Other people use silicone mats to kind of maybe make sure they don't get scraped, when they cook or drop something. I did notice today there was a post on my official electric home where that kind of melted, even though it was
we avoid that.
marketed.
I haven't had any trouble. I think.
Yeah. So you use one? Yeah. So
straight on the glass, I reckon, with the pans. So
I don't use one, but yeah, that's an option too.
And there's more and more people cooking on induction. The question always comes up about woks, and how can you adapt different cultures' food to induction cooking? And there's definitely more and more demonstrations and videos and YouTubes and things online showing people.
So my wife's Vietnamese, and my wife's family's Vietnamese, and she's very happy with the cooktop. She likes it a lot better than the gas cooktop in Da Nang, Vietnam. And eventually our mother-in-law wanted one as well. So the gas went. The problem she had over there, used to leave the windows open and stuff because it's damn hot. And the wind always blew out the gas flames. That was a challenge, and she hated the cleaning. And now she's on induction cooktop. She would not turn back. She was really hesitant. She was super against. And then, maybe 6-7 years ago, she went induction and hasn't turned back. And now all the neighbours are getting induction as well. They copied us.
We need that influencer.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say. It's, it is all about what you can see, and that's why we're doing these videos, I guess. We're about to go to some questions from the audience, but we hadn't gotten into hot water and the big question about noise. So Matthew, do you want to talk quickly about?
Well, can I start, because I'm not the expert? I couldn't tell that my sand and heat pump was on until I saw the blades of grass moving outside of it, and I was standing right there. So at 37 decibels, is it, Matthew? It's really, really quiet, and none of those issues with the higher end units. And that was another thing. If I were doing a heat pump, spreadsheet, I would include the decibel rating, and if you can afford it, that's one of the trade-offs that I think you get with price, is this noise.
So I originally, I'm on my second heat pump. So my first one was a Siddons. That company no longer exists, but they were the original family who brought out the Quantum heat pumps, and that was the equal first heat pump on the market globally. It was like Quantum and Stiebel Ultram. Stiebel Ultram is still in the market. Quantum's owned by different people in Malaysia, and it's not exactly the same thing, but it's still in the market. But I had a Siddons one that I got, and it was, I called it the sound of renewable energy, but it was basically like a jet engine. So when I started off with the business supplying Daikin US 7s, which was a really fancy air conditioner that unfortunately we can no longer get. It controlled humidity as well. And then evolved into doing the sand and hot water heat pumps. And at that point, I had my unit and I'd told everybody how it's the sound of renewable energy. But I was quick thinking that, no, your average person out there isn't going to be like as hardcore as Matthew. They're not going to like.
Don't appreciate the sound of renewable energy.
The sound of renewable energy, they needed to be dead silent. So a Sandon installed on the factory supplied rubber feet, which is how they test it at 1 meter, is very, very quiet. They could be a little bit louder if you put them on a wall bracket. So keep that in mind. But if they're on the rubber feet, they should be very quiet. And people have told me, oh no, the neighbour's going to complain. No way. Like if you've got your window open directly below the window, you put your ear up to the fire screen, you might be able to hear it. That's your best chance of hearing it.
And we have double glazing throughout. And my neighbors have a gas hydronic system and instantaneous gas hydronic system and a gas hot water system, and I can hear that turn on every morning. So yeah. So the comparison, I mean, that's a lot louder than ours is now. But to be fair, not all heat pumps are as quiet as the Sandon and the Reclaim. The Reclaim, we keep mentioning Sandon. I have a Sandon. Matthew installs Sandons, but Reclaim is up there. Very similar units. A little bit different in the control of the timers, but same refrigerant, same price point, same noise. But there are, like, the Stiebel Ultron's still in the market. I don't know if you know how loud that one is, Matthew, but it is a little bit louder.
A bit louder, yeah. But it's not in the sound of renewable energy category, to be fair to Steve. But it's louder. I'll just point out the Sandon has an optional Wi-Fi controller now. So
yeah.
And what happens, just thinking beyond the colder climates, you talked about those units being rated for very cold. What happens in the warmer climates, and thinking about people in other parts of the country that are asking, why should I care?
It's easier to heat hot air, to pull heat out of hot air than it is to pull heat out of cold air. So they become much more efficient. The hotter the temperature is outside, but you do have to look out for sun exposure, and there are plastic components to it, so they are rated to be outside, but ours is on the south side of the house for that reason. That's because that's where the services are, but B, to protect it some from the sun. So it is a consideration. It's not the only consideration, but it is a consideration.
Yeah, I know of Sandons. They've been in the market a bit longer, since 2010, installed on all sorts of buildings, and certainly UV damage is not what's doing anything to them. So you don't have to be too concerned there. Some of those, all-in-one units, they do have a lot of plastic facing and stuff like that, so it may be a consideration. And I think if you're in Tasmania or you're in Victoria in the colder parts, then that really leans you towards definitely considering the extra investment and getting a high quality unit like a Sandon. Yes, if you're in Queensland, they're very unlikely unless you're in Atherton Tablelands, or if you're in the regular where most of the population is, warm areas around Brisbane and Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast, then you're not going to be relying on the the electric booster because the temperature's down at 7 or 4 or 5 or 0 degrees or something. So they're going to perform not as badly as those units perform in winter. And remember that your water consumption, your behaviour is you're going to use a lot more hot water in winter, but your heat pumps are going to not perform quite as well because the temperature outside's 5 degrees or 7 degrees or something. The final thing I want to point out though, some cheaper units, there's been a problem, and I know somebody who had a Rinnai installed with his house, a Rinnai heat pump, and he noticed on his Fronius solar monitoring that it was coming at 2,000 watts constant and going for hours and hours. So it was basically an electric heater. The heat pump wasn't working. He eventually complained and got his way, and they replaced it with another Rinnai. And this is only about 2 years ago, and the same thing happened again. So it's something you'd want to check to make sure that your heat pump is not just running on the backup element. And the sort of power consumption you see from a heat pump, a cheaper one to not be noisy might have a longer heat cycle. So if you've got one that has like an 8-hour heat cycle or a 6 or 7 or 8, that's probably like got a 750 watt motor. So you should see, not more than a kilowatt. Something like a Sandon is about a kilowatt, so you should see 1,100 watts. If it has a backup element in it and you're seeing 2,000 or 3,000 watts or something like that, the backup element's running. If you're seeing that all the time, you've got a faulty unit. And I'm almost of the opinion, and this is pretty hardcore, that units that have a backup element shouldn't be part of the subsidy programs. They should actually be removed. So then that would narrow the field down to a few units, and then more can come on. At the moment, the subsidies are getting eaten up by units with backup elements, which again are causing that problem in the middle of winter, where we're going to have a huge peak in winter because we're just the same as running electric storage units in the worst of winter, which we've got to create a renewable grid around.
I was going to ask a question about that because I've been made aware of the white certificate scheme and the problems with those schemes about buying lower quality units. Can you speak to that in terms of the rebates that are out there and or the certificates that people can access to take off some of the cost of investing in some of these appliances?
I'm in two minds about it. I would love volume stuff to go out very cheap, so they'd be very accessible. But some of the products I've seen, Eco Alliances, which has now gone out of the market and been replaced by Ecogenico, it seems. I've seen installations where, and these are units that get marketed for $0 or up to $1,000. And there was a electric storage unit indoors in a hall, and the heat pump was installed next to it indoors in the hall, and the power cable was run through the wall as a consumer plug, which it wasn't meant to be a consumer plug, and it was run through the wall. So they installed a consumer plug through a wall, and this is a machine that came free to the particular person that was installed in a business. So that stuff should have been caught up with, and they shouldn't have achieved the certificates. So there are people who are stamping out units, which is great if the units are quality. Hopefully that new version, the Ecogenico, is better than the Eco Alliance one, which it may be. I haven't been able to test it to find out. But there are 2 or 3 models in that really cheap end, and I would be concerned about them. And it's the backup elements also that I'm concerned with. Are they just going to run on the backup element? So you've just paid. You're talking about the technology with the split systems where you paid for the heat pump unit, but it never runs, and you've just got an electric storage unit. So all the negatives of that, high costs for the consumer, high costs for the grid and the society at large, and high costs for the environment because you've built a heat pump that doesn't ever run. So, and so I don't know how that's going to be addressed. Like I said, my opinion would be we need to phase out units with an electric resistive backup element.
Yes. And tighten up the requirements from an installer perspective as well. I think that there's an issue with quality as well. The other thing that is part of the reason that they are $0 in some cases, or under $1,000 or under a couple $100, is that you get, at least in Victoria, there's a rebate as well, and you only get one shot at that currently. So if for some reason it doesn't work out or it fails and you need to get another one, then you can't access that again. So yeah, there's a lot of things with the program that I think can be improved. We should all be lobbying to try to make sure that the program gets improved. And, Matthew's got some ideas. I think that it is I do think government's in a tricky space, because exactly what Matthew says, if we're going to have to electrify en masse, we need to be able to cover the price points for everybody, and have an entry point system. But unfortunately, quality is, it's not looks, it's quality that you get when you and features that you get when you spend more.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the marketing too, because I'm getting a lot of inbound inquiries, people who've seen the messaging that there's free installs going, and I've got to tell them that our system's $4,000 or $5,000, and then they're like, "Well, why the hell is it that price if the government's paying for it?" And I have to explain, well, the government's got subsidies in between, $1,000 and $3,000, depending on where you are, how your means test, what your postcode is. And if a system can go in for $2,000 and the labour costs $600 to $1,000, how are they landing something manufactured in China, shipped in container, stored here somewhere, shipped to a site? How cheap is that? It's very, very cheap. Yeah. So.
And I mean, we talked about, sorry, I'm going to bring it back around to the question about plastics and stuff made me think about options for people in apartments and strata units, because we keep building more apartments. So what can people do, or what should they be looking for, and what are their options if they don't have a standalone house?
Yeah, that is a hard one. And that's going to be one of the issues that may, hurt electrification moving forward. Moving forward, it will be designed into new apartments, but retrofitting existing apartments is where that's difficult. So systems can, if people have balconies, you can put the compressor outside and the tank inside. And, I don't know, maybe Matthew has a better idea of the ranges of how small you can get systems. But, that may be an option if you're replacing an internal tank already. Some people may have, their tank already inside, or they may have, and maybe you might have to have a resistive electric as you're if you don't have a place to put those compressors. It's something that I think body corps are going to have to deal with. I think there's a lot of questions around it. Hype has done some work around electrification of strata units. So, and they've got a good roadmap. So I think it'd be good to look to see what they produce. I can bring up a link of that a little bit later. But it's one of the hard questions that needs to get answered.
And I think it is difficult because often you've got small outdoor areas
or none.
Yeah, and so if you do, you're competing for that space, and if you've got a small amount of outdoor space, you're going to really cherish that. So to give up some of that is very hard. If it's on the side of buildings, some strata management committees have all sorts of trouble getting people to agree to put split outdoor units or a heat pump outside. If it's going on the roof, I'm concerned it becomes a technology blocker for solar. So you really want to make sure they're on the perimeter, like towards the south, if it can be, or at least allow large areas, expensive areas for solar to go on later, which can support EV charging or body corp services or something like that. So you end up with higgledy-piggledy of stuff on the roof, which is not great. That's a technology blocker for the other thing you want, which is solar. So yeah, those things all come into play. But certainly we have managed to help a lot of people in apartments. I'd say that sometimes the costs are higher. But you can do things like cut along the wall, so you do need plaster repairs. I have found sometimes plaster repairs to be quite cheap, because some guys, if you find a local guy, and you've got to ring around, they'll use a lot of the leftover material they're doing from big jobs to do your plaster repairs. So if you wanted to my parents got rid of the ducts from the evaporative cooling overhead, and they only paid like $300-400 to a guy who was fairly local in Bulleen. That's in east of Melbourne, and he put the cut out to me. He didn't paint it at the end, but the colour was fairly similar to the white, and eventually they got the roof painted. But $300-400 not too bad to eliminate all your, I think it was 8 or 9 or 10 or something registers, outlets. So yeah, you may have to cut plaster, unfortunately.
I mean, a question came up at our launch last week about whether or not you can split heat pump systems over multiple units, like share them?
So one outdoor unit and many indoor units. That's called a multi-head or a multi-split. There's an efficiency disadvantage, so I don't offer them. Some people think it's a great solution. The main issue is that at the peak again in winter, when you want to run all units at the same time, if you're specifying it that way, I mean, if you had some units supporting one side of the house and you never use the two sides of the house at the same time, then that would be a good usage case for a multi-head with a single outdoor unit. But if you want to use multiple units, 3 or 4 units at the same time, and you've got one outdoor unit, well, that's how much physical heat exchange area. It's like trying to run a Mack truck's heating load through a Fiat Bambino or a Mini Minor, you know. So by having distributed splits, I've got more heat exchange area, and I haven't got it all in one spot. If it's all in one spot, and it's the same with the ducted units, the big monolithic ducted units, you've got a microclimate in that location, and some of the colder air rejected can backfeed the unit, and then the efficiency is going down. And that's also an installation issue. If it's hemmed in between a fence and a house, there's not adequate ventilation. So done properly, these units do need to be able to draw air down
To have space
and reject the cold air. Yeah, so it's something we always consider with our Sandon installs and our Dakin installs to make sure that we're within the design of those.
How much?
And just to be clear, the multi-head that Matthew was talking about is for heating, not for hot water. I don't think there is a multi-tanked solution for.
There's some very edge case. You can have 2 tanks, not very big usage, or 2 heat pumps or something like that, or it's for a block of apartments where they have single hot water supply, but won't be relevant to most of the people watching here. So when we're talking about multi-heads, it's an option. So you've got ducted as an option, which we talked about earlier. You've got multi-heads where you've got one, or you might have, say, 2 outdoor units, and each of those have got 3 indoor units, or 4 indoor units, or 5. And then you've got individual distributed splits where you might have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 units distributed around your house, covering all your spaces. And that means you've got an equivalent of, say, 700 by 600 or 900 by 600 of heat exchange area outside, and you need to locate those. Some people locate them in 2 clusters, so they'll put like 2 units on the ground and then 2 units above on the wall, so it's taking up, you know, a block of space. They don't need to be all. Mine are distributed around up high on the side of my house, down the side. I mean, it's sort of blind side, down both sides, but other people have them in a group. So that's pretty much, I think, the main options for heating and cooling that are out there. And again, this is mostly a heating design thing, and getting off gas is obviously about heating.
But can you,
Rachel, maybe this is a good time to talk about efficiency too. I think we've talked a lot about the technology around electrification, but efficiency first is something we discussed earlier, and Matthew's flipped a little bit, but I don't think that's at the price of efficiency at some point in time. I think it's when you're looking at the list of things to do and your budget and how you want to phase things, sometimes the bang for buck might be topping up your insulation or insulating your walls, draft proofing, other, shading and blinds and curtains and things like that. The more you do that, the less technology you need to rely on. And
you want your building envelope as good as it can be. For a lot of people, the cavities are big in the roofs, so getting roof insulation in is quite feasible at a decent cost. Walls can be more difficult because accessing them, whether you're ripping plaster off, ripping boards off, or trying to inject things in there, that's definitely more expensive. So if your roof hasn't got really decent insulation, well, it's actually relatively cheap to get that in the roof, and the roof happens to be the highest potential vector of loss if you're starting at 0. The heat obviously rises, so. That's
you want to make sure you don't have gaps in them. So one of the things we did again before insulating is replace all the downlights with IC4 rated downlights so that we could insulate over them. So, what is it? I forget maybe 5% of gaps in your insulation is like 50% of the efficiency of it. So, so you want to make sure that everything is insulated up there. So there's a lot of improvements you can do that aren't the technology improvements.
And if you've got an air leaky house and you're not using like precision equipment, like doing a proper air pressure test, you can target gaps. You'll never get rid of them all. So you'll make big strides just by finding the gaps and eliminating them, because you won't get to the point of making the space really tight unless you start to use proper equipment to find them,
Someone recently gave me a really good sort of mental image for draft proofing, which changed my way of thinking about it, where they said if you go around with a measuring tape and you actually measure all of your gaps and then you add them up in square centimeters, you end up with a hole.
Oh, yeah. Like when they do professional air pressure testing, they then at the end can come up with, oh, you've got a gap the size of a window, hole 1 meter by 1.5 or 2 meter window. And that's the result of the air pressure test.
Yeah.
In my house, I had gaps between the Baltic pine floorboards, which had kind of obviously sort of shrunk when they cured and dried or whatever. And we ran like a boat. We ran Sikaflex, which is what they do on top of boats. Pretty painful job. You put green sticky tape for painting down. You run the Sikaflex, and then you run plastic over the top. Plastic blade across the top to clean off the excess. And at the end, we had the rubber, effectively Sikaflex rubber-like stuff between every board. And the amount of losses we're having through that's huge. And we tested the air pressure testing after that, and that was half of my losses in my house. Was these tiny little losses across the entire 150 mil floorboards that go across every room. So that's something to look at as well.
Yeah, no, and I think, thank you, Katy. It is a good point. We are talking about appliances, but we need to really emphasize that there is a lot you can do. I guess my question around that would be, if you're wanting to do the costing on all of that and you need help, where would you go to get that help? So let's say we're talking about, how much it would cost to put insulation in XYZ, and then how much it might cost and then how much savings you're going to get from your appliances that you already have that might not need upgrading, so like, how do you do all those numbers?
Yeah, well, it does help if you can spend some money up front getting an energy assessor to come in. Their job should be to look at what appliances you have, what appliances are on the market and the cost of those appliances, look at your insulation and draft proofing and what it would cost to improve those and provide a plan for you. So that's kind of what their job is. And obviously that one-stop shop is the holy grail of what we would all like, and the availability of those type of people are different in different markets. In Victoria, it's a little easier. There's more people. I think in Tasmania, you probably can get some, but it's a little bit harder in different. I think Sydney, it's actually sometimes difficult to find somebody to do that. So it kind of depends on where you are, and hopefully, this is part of the electrification process is an economic change too, and there's more trades that are going to be necessary for the future for this, and that's one of the trades that I think is an important piece of the puzzle. There are I know in Victoria, I don't know elsewhere, there are more, actually Matthew's one of the, I think, one-stop shop type pioneers in this situation of providing a heating solution, a hot water solution, shower head solution. Let's not forget our shower head from an efficiency perspective. I don't think you do induction cooktops, Matthew, but
we do give advice on them, but I gave half of the advice to you before. So yeah,
Matthew does offer advice too. So there's a lot more firms like Pure Electric that are out there that can come in and do assessment. They do scope the job themselves as well, but they also can, create a plan and give you some suggestions that you can then go out and, try to seek other suppliers for. And that's, if you can afford it up front, it probably will save a lot of headaches and research time, et cetera, down the track.
Mm.
And if you just want a take home of some of the ones we'd be giving you advice on, if you've got an existing split air conditioner, I think there's examples given earlier, like a modern, being the last 15 years, Japanese inverter split, for example, that unit probably is very good in reverse cycle mode if it has a heat mode. So straight away, you can start using that by replacing your gas heating, or even augmenting the gas heating by having it on would mean that you're splitting between the two if it's not quite cutting it, so it's actually displacing the gas, and you might be able to see the results from doing that. The shower heads, we supply a 5-litre Methven Curie Satin Jet. There's a lot of 7.5-litre shower heads on the market. If you're above 7.5 litres, you're using a lot more energy, and water and sewage disposal charge. So that's the highest saving you can get from anything in your house, is replacing your shower head if you've got one that's doing 9 litres, 12 litres. We've seen 20. We've seen 24 litres per minute. You don't really need 24 litres per minute. You know, it's a bucket every minute. Just sort of put on.
We did talk a little bit about this last week, but there is a problem with a lack of independent ratings for some of these.
Well, I'll just say the Methven Curie Satin Jet 5 liter, that's the one that Matthew sells, and it's not cheap. But that is the superior shower experience. I always quote that my 5-year-old, when he was 5, said, I want to marry it. It is a really good shower experience. Unfortunately, they don't sell them in, kind of the Bunnings and other places where you can get Methven Curie Satin Jet 7 liters, which is not as good of a shower experience. So kind of non-intuitively, counterintuitively, the 5 liter per minute shower head is much better than the 7 liter per minute shower head with the same name. So I'm giving a plug to Matthew. Matthew, the Pure Electric, carries them, and
I just love the fact that it's the number one saving energy and water thing you could ever do, and that's why I've kept the product alive as best I can, even though the manufacturer thinks there's no market for it. They've told me that repeatedly. They sort of barely will supply it. Lucky I bought lots. In fact, that's the only way they'd sell them to me. And so yeah, we've still got the product there. I wish that this product would be the market and promoted, but unfortunately, it's not. It's sort of promoted through Renew magazine and in a small way. We have worked with tests with the water authorities, but I haven't seen the results of those. But try and get them into more disadvantaged people's houses and people in various sectors that can't access the product. But it's a pity. I wish they were so mass market that I didn't feel the need to sell them. I wish there was a program door knocking everybody, and just unlike some of the programs that door knock and just offering to replace everyone with one of those shower heads, and then they only cost $30 or $50 each or something.
So
I did get one of mine free.
Before we run out of time, I know we've got something to talk about shower heads, but I think you just need to give people one final takeaway. We've only got 2 minutes left. So you've got 1 minute each to give us your one takeaway that you think people should think about when looking at choosing appliances.
Well, it is that issue of doing the research. And I know a lot of people will want to go to a trusted plumber that they have or electrician that they have, but some of the technology has advanced beyond some of the skill set of the people that we've been relying on. And so I would do your own research and seek out people that are a little more clued into the electrification as a business model. It tends to be they tend to be more open and understand what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve, and not kind of push back on some of the things that you want to see.
Yep.
And subscribe to Renew.
And subscribe to Renew. And My Efficient Electric Home. I'll give that plug as well. There's a lot of good peer-to-peer advice. Sometimes not. If you don't want it, sometimes you'll get it anyway. But yeah, some good peer-to-peer advice. So if you have Facebook, do those there.
Get yourself a Renew subscription. As everyone said, My Efficient Electric Home is a place you can find out more. If you're motivated to do something, stick with where you're motivated. If it's in the gamut, in the broad spectrum of things that they're doing, stick with what you think you've cottoned onto. It might be because someone's given you a referral and they had success. Just go with it, and then you can move to the next thing. Once you've cleared the decks of your hot water, or your cooked, or your heating, or whatever it happens to be, your insulation, then you can move to the next thing. So if you keep swapping around, you might get sort of, in a decision impaired sort of environment where you can't quite, there's too much on. Just concentrate on one thing and move to the next thing. That'd be my advice.
Thank you. And thank you both for being so generous with your time. And I can see that the audience has very much appreciated all of the information that you have shared tonight. So that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much to our panelists, Matthew and Katy, and thanks to our sponsors, Pure Electric, Department of Energy, Environment, Climate Action, and Be Energy Efficient. We are also grateful to our funders, the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Boundless Earth, for making this all happen. So please make sure to tune in to the next 2 events of the series. Next week, we're going to be looking at solar EVs and batteries. And finally, we're going to be looking at tying it all up with plumbing, wiring, troubleshooting, and tradies. And so we think there's going to be a lot more of information there in all of those sessions to complement the ones that we've had tonight. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.